Okay, so it kind of blows my mind, but it's also good to be proven right. Especially lately, I've been hitting this point repeatedly where I am not understanding why I am being censored and silenced for speaking the truth and being the voice of reason. Like on YouTube, I got a comment restriction for posting the truth about the harms of marijuana. Almost like whoever runs YouTube is using it for social engineering. And I get this with other social media, of course, as well. It's all tools for social engineering by the rich, the elite, the CIA, I don't know. Whoever uses Silicon Valley to psy-up the masses like Edward Bernays in the 1920s, right? But, yeah, I applied psychological analysis, factor analysis, and I identified two commonalities, common contributing, factors, causal components with the anti-Semitic act of Robert Bowers, where he murdered 11 Jews in a synagogue. I think it was in Philadelphia, I can't remember. And Darrell Brooks, who ran over a whole bunch of white people in Waukesha. Those two factors were social media and marijuana. You could argue marijuana is the primary causal component because it makes people more susceptible to manipulation and incitement to violence through social media. You're more emotionally stable when you're not high, when you're not on drugs. Marijuana makes you more psychologically malleable, thus more susceptible to manipulation by pixels on a screen, for example. And thus more involuntary emotional response to articles, headlines, whatever, just, electronic device stimulus. Excuse me, I gotta get some water real quick. Well, my mind is blown. I'm taking a criminal justice course right now, and I just read the assailant study. The FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Office of Partner Engagement, conducted the assailant study, Mindsets and Behaviors. In 2016, there was the murders of 64 officers killed in 53 incidents. And they analyzed all the incidents as well as an additional 37 incidents in 2016 through open source information and law enforcement databases. Right. In total, the FBI examined 50 incidents that occurred due to that. I'm reading the PDF. Anyway, and you can look this up yourself, of course. The 50 assailants examined in the study had several common characteristics. 86% of the assailants had prior criminal histories, and 43 out of 50. And 56%, 28 out of 50, were known to the local police or sheriff's department. The assailants in these incidents had access to firearms, whether obtained legally or illegally, with several of the stolen weapons changing hands multiple times before coming into the possession of the assailant. The assailant had diagnosed mental health issues in 18%, 9 out of 50, of the fatal encounters. However, mental health concerns were anecdotally identified as a contributing factor in 40%. All of a sudden, everybody's faking crazy to get out of consequences, right? Head injuries, post-traumatic stress, schizophrenia, and paranoia were all cited anecdotally by individuals who knew the assailants. Anecdotal testimony is an evidence because anecdotal testimony can be falsified. And in half of those cases, the assailant was also under the influence of methamphetamines, marijuana/THC, prescription drugs, and or alcohol. Overall, 60%, 30 out of 50 of the assailants had a history of drug use, with 32%, 16 out of 50, confirmed to have been under the influence at the time of the incident. 46%, 23 out of 50, of the assailants' toxicology was unknown at the time of the study. And then it gets into, all the history and stuff, like 44% of the assailants had a known history of domestic violence, 26% had active warrants, 32% were on probation or parole. The case study shared commonalities. The majority of assailants attacked law enforcement for one of two reasons. They expressed a desire to kill law enforcement, or they felt as if they were going to lose their freedom by going back to jail or prison. But, you can read this all on your own. I'm just going to look for this specific thing. The specific stuff that I wish to highlight here. So, history of drug use, marijuana, THC. 28%, 14 out of 50, of the assailants expressed a desire to kill law enforcement officers prior to carrying out their attacks. The main reasons expressed by assailants as to why they wanted to attack law enforcement officers were for social and or political reasons, or they had a hatred of law enforcement. The assailants in this category posted their beliefs on social media and or informed their friends and family of their intentions prior to ambushing or initiating violence against law enforcement. The assailants, inspired by social and or political reasons, believed that attacking police officers was their way to get justice for those who had been, in their view, unjustly killed by law enforcement. These assailants expressed what they thought, that they were distrustful of police due to previous personal interactions, blah, blah, blah. And they cite the Black Lives Matter movement on social media as one of the commonalities. But 3 paragraphs later, attacks motivated for a desire to remain free. An assailant's desire to remain free and not return to custody was the main commonality shown in a majority of the fatal attacks. These attacks took one of two forms: drug use that led to a heightened sense of desperation to avoid arrest and incarceration, and the assailant's desire for freedom. Now here's what blows my mind. Aside from the other obvious thing that social media is inciting violence against police, etc., and so are politicians, which is in the study. Law enforcement officials noted an increase in the number of subjects using drugs and being in a drug-induced psychosis when contacted by police. Many law enforcement personnel are seeing an escalation towards violence by those who abuse drugs. A high percentage of assailants were under the influence during these incidents or had a history of drug use. Officer interviews highlighted the assailant's skewed decision-making matrix when contacted by law enforcement while under the influence of a narcotic, compounded with the thought of not wanting to return to custody. Instead of complying, as they typically had in the past, they instead attacked. Multiple agencies expressed surprise that the fatal encounters occurred because the assailants had no prior history of violent attacks against the police. This is consistent with the fact that prior to fatal encounter, only a quarter of the assailants had expressed on social media or to friends and family that they would do anything not to go back to jail. And then they get into how politicians have thrown them under the bus. After that, turnstile justice system. Law enforcement officials across the country stated that justice reform acts, especially laws decriminalizing drugs and reducing penalties for narcotics offenses, have the effect of releasing criminals at a faster and higher rate than ever before. Assailants who experience this turnstile justice system know they are going to receive a lighter sentence than they would have in the past and will be released early if incarcerated at all. This may lead to a belief by the assailant that consequences no longer exist for criminal acts, especially drug offenses. Due to both of these factors, upon release, the assailants with a history of drug offenses were more prone to be non-compliant while under the influence. In addition, police officers stated that an assailant who has entered into a drug-induced psychosis, this includes marijuana. I guarantee marijuana is the number one because marijuana is the number one drug in the United States according to these statistics. Police officers stated that an assailant who has entered into a drug-induced psychosis that causes desperation and paranoia is more willing to shoot an officer to stay out of jail. Multiple law enforcement agencies believe that the assailant in their specific incident would not have used deadly force against the officer if the assailant was sober. Across the country, law enforcement officials link the decriminalization of drugs to the increase in violent attacks on law enforcement. What the They've known this since 2016. That decriminalizing marijuana leads to an increase in violent assaults, homicides, etc. And they're still pushing it. And just like making this video, right? All of my posting factual observations to these connections are not stopping it. It's not stopping anything. Well, obviously, it's not going to stop drug users because drug users don't listen to reason. They have, cannabis-induced psychosis and cognitive impairment. But why would the politicians go along with it? Why wouldn't the police arrest the politicians pushing things like marijuana legalization that lead to the murder of police?